Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I'm here to speak about honoring Steve Gleason with the Congressional Gold Medal. Now, Steve is well known in Louisiana through the Gulf Coast and to football fans across the country. He's a Washington State native, as Senator Murray recently spoke, but now lives in New Orleans with his wife, Michelle, and his son, Rivers. Steve played in the NFL for 8 seasons, mostly with the New Orleans Saints, famous for the New Orleans Saints because on September the 25th, 2006, Monday Night Football, the first game back in the Superdome, when the Superdome reopened after Hurricane Katrina, the Saints were playing their arch rival and division opponent, the hated Atlanta Falcons. Probably the presiding officer likes the Falcons. The Falcons were punting from deep in their own territory. Steve broke through the line, blocked the punt. Fellow Saint Curtis DeLoach recovered the ball for a touchdown. The stadium erupted, 70,000 fans in a dome stadium. I was watching on TV. Al Michaels was blown away. An incredible moment, not just for the football team, but because it was when the game just opened after Hurricane Katrina had almost destroyed a city and indeed the whole Gulf Coast. It had that much more meaning. The emotion was about a play, but for as much as what the play symbolized as for the game. And Steve Gleason's block punt symbolized, as Steve would say, no white flags. New Orleans, the Gulf Coast was back. And despite Katrina's devastation, we would not surrender. Now, Steve demonstrates that no white flags now in another arena. In 2011, Steve was diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also called Lou Gehrig's disease. He can't speak, and except for moving his eyes and blinking, he cannot move. But Steve can still think. And because he can think, and what he has done with his thoughts is why he inspires and why we wish to honor him with the Congressional Gold Medal. He has a difficult challenge, but his accomplishments addressing that challenge is what is noteworthy. After his diagnosis, Steve and his wife began a mission to show that patients with diseases like ALS can not only live, but they can thrive. Steve declared that there would be no white flags, and that became the mantra of something he began, which is the Gleason Initiative Foundation. Now, this foundation helps provide individuals who have neuromuscular disease or other injuries with cutting-edge technology, equipment, and services. It raises global awareness about ALS to find solutions and an end to the disease. It has also helped hundreds of people with ALS experience life's adventures they never thought possible. Now, Steve's story and mission have been chronicled by national and local media outlets, as well as a 2016 documentary, Gleason, which showed what his life has been like since 2011. And when you first meet Steve, you expect to feel pity. And yet, as you walk in and meet him and see what he has done as he speaks to you through the machines he's helped develop, you feel inspired. And his perseverance and commitment to giving hope to others is amazing. Mr. President, since his diagnosis, let me give you a partial list of that which he has done, he and his wife. Again, he founded the foundation of which I just spoke. Steve, in partnership with Microsoft, and I have a poster here to demonstrate. Here's Steve, the Microsoft team. In partnership with Microsoft, developed eye tracking technology which allows him to communicate and to move. So Steve looks up here. Again, he can only move his eyes and blink his eyes. And so he can look at this keyboard, and if he says, turn my wheelchair to the right, he looks there and blinks his eyes, then his wheelchair will turn to the right. He's got some pre-recorded statements. So if you walk in, he's going to blink at a pre-recorded statement. It says, hello, my name is Steve Gleason, how are you? And then he will have, if he wishes to say something spontaneously, he can blink, 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 and it will say, well, let's discuss this further. Now, it's not all just It's not just all kind of, well, let's talk business. He has his iTunes on there. He can blink and get his favorite song. And so there's a multiplicity of function here that allows the man to live. And not just him, because among the other accomplishments Steve Gleason and his wife Michelle have achieved is he led efforts to enact legislation. The Steve Gleason's Give Them a Voice Act, I believe it was called, to make these devices available to those suffering from neurodegenerative diseases. It is a bill that I was privileged to introduce and which has passed into law. Steve continues to challenge the heads of industry and medicine to improve the technology and the science to find a cure for ALS. Let me also mention that he opened the Team Gleason House for Innovative Living, where up to 18 people can live as productively and as independently as possible. A few years ago, Steve hosted a global summit bringing together researchers, patients, caregivers, and others in the ALS community. The summit resulted in the single largest coordinated and collaborative ALS research project in the world called Answer ALS. It has nearly 24 research institutions, 1,000 patients, and 20 trillion data points that will help define unknown pathways to lead to new treatments or to cures. In recognition of Steve's work, in April, I introduced legislation with Senators Murray, Kennedy, and Cantwell to honor Steve Gleason with the Congressional Gold Medal. Steve's story is so compelling that in less than 2 months, over 70 of our colleagues joined to affirm Steve's inspiring story and impact upon his fellow Americans to make him worthy of the highest honor Congress can bestow. Steve should be awarded this medal. He's an example of what makes our country great. He has given hope to many. He gives hope to all those who have ever received a devastating diagnosis. And his message is simple. Your life still has meaning. Your best years can still be ahead of you. Steve is a role model not just for those in the disability community, but for all Americans. I suspect that what he may appreciate most about this honor is the attention it brings to find solutions and cures for those with diseases such as ALS. I'd like to thank my colleagues, their staff, and everyone else who has helped build support for this legislation, including Microsoft, the ALS Association, the NFL, and the New Orleans Saints. I wish to encourage my colleagues in the House to co-sponsor this legislation and to pass it as soon as possible. And I'd like to thank Steve for continuing to be an example of commitment, perseverance, and inspiration. Now, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs be discharged from further consideration of S-2652 and that the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
S-2652, a bill to award a Congressional Gold Medal to Stephen Michael Gleason.
Without objection, the committee is discharged. The Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield the floor.